Hello, this is Rob Hirschfeld with a Digital Rebar instructional video. Tonight we are going through the high availability tutorial, and we are going to show you how to build a HA configuration for Digital Rebar and test it. We're not doing it with CoroSync. To make this really fully production ready, you'd want something like CoroSync that would handle the failover. We are doing this all within Digital Rebar, so the failover will be manual. And we're following instructions in the documentation under high availability, and you can read through what these are, and we're going to go through all of these pieces. And happily, what I'm showing you is actually built based on a stage, and let me actually remove the I'm going to build a whole new stage and workflow to demonstrate this. First, let's introduce you what I've built for the system a little bit. So right now I have a blank Digital Rebar system. I'm going to use Digital Rebar to install Digital Rebar. Important and fun. Component for this that'll make it very, very consistent. You of course don't have to do this in the field, but it does make things easier to repeat and test, so that's what we're going to do with it. And to do that, I have I'm using VirtualBox on my local system, and I have some machines already ready to go. So I'm going to go ahead and start these. They're not discovered yet, so we're starting completely blank. So in this process, you can see them booting right here. Let me show you. And we're going to do this in Sledgehammer. You could do it on a CentOS or a regular system. CentOS is fast and easy for me to test. It is CentOS, and so that is the model we're going to follow here. So I'm just booting into Sledgehammer, pretty straightforward. You're not going to see these again. I'm going to move them off screen, and they're already showing up. So in a moment you'll see them register. We will use some SSH sessions and connect into the boxes, and that'll all make sense in a minute. So we're going back through. These are the two machines that we've built and gotten ready to go, and I do have my SSH key already installed in here. Let me show you the profile. Here's our global profile, and this is my key. You're welcome to add my public key to your systems. Rock on. Just let me know. Happy to know. But the other thing that we've done here is we've added two additional parameters in this case. One of them is this DR server zip URL. So I'm using, I'm working on adding something into the task library called drp-server-install, drp-server-install. I'm going to walk you through what that does. One of the things it does is it defines this zip URL, so you can specify the zip file that you want to install. Super handy. So when you're installing Digital Rebar, I highly recommend you provide the zip file. That's handy. I'll show you exactly where this shows up. Well, it's obvious in Bootstrap, DR provision, and then in this case, I'm using, you won't have to do this, you'll be able to pull down the binary, it'll just include HA. I've been using a test binary for this, and so the DR server replace DRP allows me to specify a new Digital Rebar provision, so a replacement binary. Super handy to have if you want to use or test the very latest code. You don't want to have to update the zip file every time. You can just swap in that DRP binary. Very, very handy. And so those are the two key things I need. What you'll see if I go into Files and Bootstrap, so I have a directory called Bootstrap, and in that I have this DR provision, that's my new binary, the zip file, which is all the other components, and install.sh. And you must have install.sh in Bootstrap. That is the seeding file that makes the install stage work. And so let me show you what the install stage script looks like. This is the DR server install. It's just a task. It has some documentation. It has extra claims because you need some special privileges to make this work. It has these extra parameters. You'll see the HA, 4 HA parameters, and zip URL. It defines a template. So this actually is what builds. If you look at the documentation, you have to build a HA conf file. Pretty straightforward stuff. It just defines the HA conf parameters, and so we're going to create that either way and just disable it on a normal install, and then it doesn't install. So fundamentally what this is going to do is it's going to download install.sh. It's going to grab the zip file either from the internet or from downloading it. It'll do a basic install script, And then it does some interesting things. It'll actually detect whether or not it has information. It'll replace the file. It'll install, so it'll start, reload the daemon and start, and then it'll also do something very important, which is it'll generate a token if we need an HA token. It actually takes 3 passes to build the primary in this process. And it also installs the license for Digital Rebar, because you have to have a license to be in HA configuration. It'll actually pull it from the installing Digital Rebar server into the server that you're setting up. One of the things that's important to understand with the HA is that you only set up the first one as a full DRP server. When you set up the passive node or nodes, you set them up very minimally with the HA configuration, and then they will synchronize and pull. You don't have to configure the HA, the passive sides at all. All you're really doing is giving them the HA configuration that says go get all the information you need, which will include the license and the tokens and the keys and all the other pieces. So I need these seeding components to get that first install going. So in this case, I have my first machine. I'm going to go ahead and take .10, which is excellent. And for .10, I'm going to go through and I set it to do an inventory stage because I wanted to have that, and that's still in there, so just a normal discovery otherwise. I'm going to give it the world just so it's more distinctive. And then one thing I do need to set for the primary, and I'm going to go ahead and set it, is HA passive. So there's a field called HA passive. I'm going to add this in, and I want that to be false. A little backwards logic, but I want that to be false for my primary server. So I'm going to go ahead and set that. It's going to be ignored in the install, but since I'm editing the server, I wanted to go ahead and get that process started. So next, now all I have to do is go in and start a workflow for install. But let me show you how I built that workflow, because it doesn't come automatically. The install workflow is a workflow. So I built install workflow. The only thing in the install workflow is the install stage. Another thing that doesn't come out of the box. The only thing that comes in the core task library out of the box is the task dr provision install. I didn't want to create a whole bunch of extra stages and workflows that just wrap that one task. So there is a workflow. I had to build a workflow called install with a task called install. That task called install wraps dr server install. You can see I've done it a couple of times, and the amount of time it takes is remarkably consistent with the way this install process works. So dr server install is the code I was showing you. It's got the config template, and then it's got that code exactly as it was. I'm not even going to bother to re-upload it. And if you drill in here a little bit, you can see it's just building a standard HA enabled true HA address, all those types of things. We're going to get to there in a second. I'm not too worried about it just yet. What I want to do is start the install process for this server. So we're going to come in here, going to pick install, and run the install process. And what this is going to do is start Digital Rebar on the system. You can actually see doing a little bit of work in the background. And what I want to do here is we're going to go to that server. This is the wrong one. This is going to be the 11 server. Here's the 10 server. So here's 10. I'm going to clear out my key so it can log in again. I'm going to SSH into that machine. So now I've SSH'd in while it's running. It's still doing dr server in the background. And I'm going to say journal cuddle. I'm going to get the full logs and keep updating them. And I need to see dr provision, the binary. So this is actually showing me that I'm doing the install. Very handy command. And so right now it's just going through the process of doing the Digital Rebar provision install of that system. Inside of this install process, it's already completed it. What you're going to see is our normal install scroll. It does some output, so it actually says, yeah, I uploaded the license for you, I tested the APIs. Pretty handy, pretty straightforward. It does, and this is important, also show you the version of the binaries that you've installed. That's important to me because I'm patching the binary and I want to make sure I have the correct version. So pretty straightforward stuff from that. I've done a lot of installs now with that task, and it's rock solid. Very great, very good. So next thing that we're going to do is now we actually need to build a profile for that cluster. So I'm going to add a new profile. I'm just going to call it cluster, not too creatively named. And I need to set a couple of keys. So they're all HA dash something. So HA dash address. So I'm going to go ahead and set the address, which is going to be 192.168.56 dot. I'm in that subnet, so I'm going to say give it 100, and I have to give it a CIDR, which is excellent. Then I need HA. I'm going to give it an ID. So just like DRPs can have IDs, in this case I need to give this a reasonable ID. So here I'm going to call it cluster, keeping with my theme. And then I need to give it an HA. Interface is going to default to 0. In that case, this is good. Passive defaults to true, which is fine. I can ignore setting those two things. I do need a token. So in this case, I don't know what the token is, so I'm not going to define it yet. We can't generate the HA token until we've gone through and set the HA configuration up. So this is pass number 2 of running the dr install. I want to remember to set my cluster profile because it has those values in it. So I'm now telling the installer that I'm trying to build an HA cluster by setting those parameters. In the workflow, I'm going to clear the workflow and then reset it, and it's going to go ahead and run the install process again. So now it's telling you can actually see I stopped and restarted the system. That's what I'm seeing in this log scroll. So you can actually see the reset API server is up, and it's going back through. If I look at the log here, what you'll see going through here is I'm going through the same thing, except now I have an extra value. It's actually generating, it's generating my HA token. So let me grab this HA token. I grab the exact place. Oh, it's long. So this token is in the docs as something that you need to generate. I just cut and pasted. I'm going through the process. I'm uploading license. Everything's looking great. I go into profiles over here. Go back to my cluster. Now I can come in. I can add HA token. Added that. It's secure, which it should be. So let me go ahead and do that. Now I have the token. No extra carriage return. No extra spaces at the beginning. Good. I'm going to save that. Okay, so now I have all of the parameters I need to actually build a working HA cluster. So I'm going to go back through this one, and I'm going to run it a third time so that my config file has all the parameters in it that I need. Okay, at this point I already had a working cluster. So if I came back in here and went into my website, and instead of looking at myself, I looked at this new cluster, 56100, that looks great. I have to accept the certificate. It's a completely new cluster. The TLS certificate, great. I'm going to keep using my local UX instead of portal. The reason I'm doing that is because in the version I have here, once again, this is code that is making it into the tip and then production, but I can actually see my cluster ID here. I can see my cluster ID up here. So I know that I'm actually running the cluster I thought, and you'll remember I'm on 100 now. So one of the things that's happened is while I installed DRP on the 10 server, it's actually offering it on 100 on that HA IP address. Okay, very important. So it's not running as a standalone machine anymore. It's now using the HA IP address. And so that's looking like remarkably good. Pretty happy with all this. Now I'm ready to start serving this next server. So before I do that, I'm going to show you over here. Let's SSH into that machine. Remember, nothing's been installed with this. So I'm going to journal cuddle dr provision, and there's no server there. So systemd is basically saying, there's a log started, but there's nothing for me to tell you. So I'm going to slide that up here, so we are over here, so we don't have to worry about it for a moment. And I'm going to come to this server. Before I start the install, I'm going to put it in that cluster. And that's a really important thing, right? I'm trying to make an HA cluster. If I don't put it in a cluster, When it starts that passive install, it's going to think it's a whole new DRP, and it's going to install a whole new DRP, which will make all hell break loose and you'll have to reset. In this case, I want to start it as a HA server, so I have to start it with the profile. And then all I have to do is come in and say install. And that will go through, it'll install Digital Rebar, but since it's getting the HA config right from the start, I can show you over here, it's literally building it and then immediately going into HA mode. So you can see what happened is, it started it, realized it had to be in HA passive mode right there, and then it started doing the synchronization. So it's prefetching artifacts, it's streaming any changes, and then it's switching to real-time streaming mode. So this is an HA system synchronizing into the DRP system that it started from. And once it's switched into real-time streaming, I now have this running as a full passive machine. Seems pretty cool. Let's do a little thing, a little bit to prove that all this stuff works. So what I want to do is in the actual running cluster, I'm going to go to machines. I'm going to add a machine, and I'm going to call it primary because that's where we're running. I'm going to say add. Cool. So now when I added it on the primary server, the streaming changes automatically synced over to the passive server. Okay. We're now at a point where I can demonstrate a failover. To demonstrate a failover, going to my primary server, it's this one, and I'm going to send it a user2, USR2 instruction to DR provision. So what this is telling it to do is move into passive mode. So when I do that, it says, oops, you can see it down here. It says waiting on state 1 to become active. It's decided it's passive. Over here, this server said, ooh, wait a second, something just went wrong. That machine stopped responding, which is exactly right, because now that we're in passive mode, the active server is it is shut down. It's trying to go into passive mode. So here, what I'm going to do is the exact same thing. Bkill user1 to make it the active server, DR provision. And then when I journal cuddle here, it will take that time, and after a little while, it will then realize that it's the primary and will assume the responsibilities of the primary. In the meantime, this server over here, I'll just show you the bottom of the scroll, says no route to host because it is waiting for the active server to come up. So that IP address is coming over, and it's going to take a little bit of time to synchronize and figure out what it needs to do. Anytime now. There you go. So it took a little bit of time, maybe 20 seconds, and it realized it needed to do it, restarted the server over here, started all plugins, and over here you'll see that it switched in and it did exactly what it should do. It turned into the passive server, prefetched the artifacts, and switched to real-time streaming mode. So if I move these out of the way, I hit refresh for this page. No login, I just came straight back in. So my tokens, everything else was streamed over. That was exactly what I expected. And now I'm being served out of the other server. You can actually see in my log, you can see my handshakes and stuff like that coming along, which is good. So now I'm going to go in, I'm going to add a secondary server. I'm going to add that. So now in this data, I have primary and secondary servers for my machines, but now I want to go back and prove that my synchronization works. So I'm going to come back over here. I'm going to switch this one to secondary mode. And I could have multiple secondary servers. I can only have one primary at a time. Excellent. Now we've moved this one into primary. This one has exactly the same behavior, error during replication. All I have to do is come back and set it back to user 1. This is what ChorusSync would do for me if I'd installed it. And we're back into resetting and waiting for the system to synchronize. Now, if I did this right, then when this comes back to this server, I will have the data that I added for secondary. So I should have primary and secondary as the data. And I guess we can wait for a moment to see this thing go. I'm going to do the same thing over here. We're just waiting for the timeouts to take a hold. And I wish I had a lot more to tell you. This has actually been pretty straightforward from a configuration perspective. It is important to read the docs and check and see what's happening, but for the most part, if you follow this process, and I do really stress, you want this very specific. Build the server, do it generically, turn on the HA pieces, and then so that you can generate the token, then generate the token, install the token, and then reset the system again. So for building your primary, take the time, do these 3 passes through. It's really helpful to be consistent with the scripts. If you can use the scripts and do it through a workflow and manage process, super fast and easy, because it literally takes 45 seconds on these relatively underpowered VMs to build the system. So each pass through, just 45-second pass. I refresh, and you'll notice now I've got the data that I expected. So I was able to write a machine in the primary, fail over, write a machine in the secondary, fail over, come back to the primary, and it is now fully up to speed. You could do the same thing for backups, by the way. You could create a DRP, stream changes off of, and that would create a backup system for you. Just fine. Be super easy to manage that way. And that's it. That's the HA design demo. I think I've covered all the bits and pieces. I've shown you the drp-server-install task, the profile, building the profile, managing the profile, and that's all she wrote. I hope this was helpful. Please give this a whirl and see what you think, and check out that stage, dr install stage, and we're always refining and trying to make this easier and easier. So let us know what you think. Talk to you soon. Thanks.